All right, take two. Hopefully the audio is working this time. These are my favorites from May 17th through the 23rd. These are the ones that went to friends, family, and clients. And just thought I would go through a few of my favorites and pop them up on my blog like I do every week. So I'm going to start out with a pan shot of a reddish egret. Been working on ways to capitalize on getting color out of more gray days, overcast mornings, overcast evenings as we head out of May gray into June gloom. You'll see here this is a pan shot. It's a slower shutter. I think it's 1/40th of a second, which still allows the camera to shoot high frames per second, but it gives it enough time to distort with the pan as a practical effect. I really like the coloration on the reddish egret. I'm always a fan. And then I got a kick out of how sharp the eye was and the feathers kind of just behind and the beak just ahead. So one of the reasons I like that one. Next shot is going to be a pan pelican, same day. You can see the difference in the length of the pan based on foreground to background. This one didn't come out quite as good as I had hoped. If the pelican's wings were up and it would have been this in focus, I would have liked it a little bit more. But I sent this one around because it did illustrate the ability to capture that color and how a pan shot works in terms of capturing things in the foreground and background and watching that distortion. This one I did really like. Everything's panned except for the subject. A buddy of mine who did a lot of air shows and aircraft photography really got a kick out of this one, so I must have hit something he dug. Capitalizes on the colors and then split kind of midway through the composition between the water and the low tide here along the river. One of my personal favorite shots from the week. What has this shot stand out, not just that it's probably my spirit animal when it gets busy around here and I'm trying to hide. So this is a pelican with its head turned around and stuck in between its wings. The foreground bushes, the background bushes being slightly out of focus gives it a proper photography feel rather than an iPhone feel. This was shot at f8, so I was able to get a bit more depth of field where I could get the feathers kind of on the pelican's head all the way down to the detailed feathers, sort of here in the foreground. The parallel bushes are fairly in focus. And again, you get the foreground and background doing their things. This is a photo that I really liked. Along with capitalizing on when we have no sun, when you do get sun, as a photographer, not to say you can't have fun shooting when there's less sun or do different things to make a shot interesting, but capitalizing on that very first light. Obviously golden hour, the quote exists for a reason, but if you can hit that golden hour and get some contrast from the shadowing right as that light comes over, you're able to bring so much more out of a photo. Like, I really think this would be a quite anonymous photo if it was, fully illuminated, another hour down the way, where there's not necessarily those highlights of color on the yearling in the front where you can see all his neck rolls. You can see the shadowing behind, and that it gives it a whole nother level to the shot. So capitalizing on that first light is really a good way to get more out of your photos. This is another example of that. There's a sea lion. Same kind of concept. This shot fully illuminated, very, very anonymous, but by being able to grab that first light, you're able to tell so much more of a story with the composition. Ideally, I like to set up where I'm moving down with the light so I get a chance to shoot a handful of things right at first light. And this is an example of that, where that other shot's from, maybe a little bit further to the right or to the north. And then as slowly was moving as the light was hitting these different animals. Similar thing here. I'm really big into practical effects. I watch old movies because I get a kick out of them. But this is a cliff face that's angled to where it doesn't really get the light until later. And you're able to position yourself to where you can get a bird flying through that first light before anything in the background is lit. And it gives you a kind of false studio shot. And I do a little bit of work in post, but I really don't like to do a ton, so I'm not the person that's out clipping these birds out and putting them on a black background. If I can get it with the camera, I'm happy to present it, but other than that, I this brown pelican's another example. I had a lot of compliments on this one. Same sort of thing. It's just getting positioned to where you can use that cliff as your studio wall, if you will, and then because it's further away, it's more apt to come off as very dark anyway. See what's next. This was a shot that got a lot of comments. I don't exactly like how it lays out here. I like it cropped slightly tighter, but you've got again, early light, so you've got some contrast, light, dark, shadows on its own. You've got the splash and the spray. You've got the bird's feathers illuminated. This is a cormorant. But really what makes this shot stand out is that blacked out cliff face with the white spray against it. So when you crop in a little tighter, this really gives a nice feeling, that spray really steps out this image. Early morning, this one, there's two of these. This one's a little bit overloaded for me as far as the light on the right hand side of the composition, but it was an interesting shape. And what I really got a kick out of, absolutely 100% all skill, definitely not just luck, but how its feet line up with these two other pelican heads. So I thought it was funny. This one I thought was stronger photography wise. It's not relying so hard on the glare in the composition. In fact, you might crop it even a little further out. It's highlighting, you can see that it's first light based on these highlights in the silhouetted feathers. These other pelicans doing their thing. There's actually sea lions out here. So that shot was intriguing to me. There's two of these shots as well. I'm not 100% sure which one I like better. This one is much more of an eye contact shot, which sometimes I like, sometimes I don't. But the bushes and the linear display here gives it a very nice theme. You can see the details on this pelican. Like I said, I can't decide whether I like this one or the next one, which I'm going to show. Which the next one, this one probably will end up on my site. While you're not getting the eye-to-eye look, the pelican's staring out to where the sun's coming over the hill. You've still got all of the bushes here illuminated, first light. You've got contrast. You've got the swirl here in the feathers behind its neck. You've got the details. I really liked this shot. I thought that the bushes bringing color while not being, the true subject. Like, is the subject the color shift, or is the subject what's in focus? It kind of depends on what you appreciate and what you like, I guess. This is another example of using that very first light. The light hasn't gotten down to hit the birds or the rocks below. It really isn't even illuminating this rock yet. Again, you're kind of picking your spots and moving, okay, where's that light going to hit? Where is it going to give me that contrast naturally? And some about it impresses me on how graceful these big pelicans can be, with this beak that's this long, just grabbing the one feather and kind of preening just the one. I'm not sure I would ever put this in my office or my house, but I got a kick out of it. Here's some looks at seals. If you're down here in La Jolla, they just reopened, the beach to children's pool. My 2 cents, just shoot with a zoom. You don't need to be on the sand or in the beach to get these shots. These shots were achieved. I snuck down, crept down the stairs, and sat on that landing. And so none of the animals actually really even acknowledged that I was there. They were on the other side of the sand. I'm shooting with a long lens. I'm able to capture their behavior as they're behaving. They're not staring at me scared. They're not debating if they're going to be running away. You know, you're able to get this guy floating with his, he's floating just a few inches of water, got his paw up over his hand, or his flipper up over his hand, low tide. Really, not flailing around. You can see the water is very calm. And that's what I'm trying to do when I go out and take wildlife photos, is to get the behaviors like this without causing any behavior. So this is a shot I liked based on the coloring. Again, kind of working with first light. The entire composition isn't illuminated yet. The seal is very mellow. It's not really even paying attention to me, just kind of barely swimming along. The light is illuminating, down on this this classic kind of angle, but then it bursts out and it captures the subject and pulls back into that angle. I think this one, I really like this shot. I could see this ending up somewhere in my world. Another shot, same seal, similar thing. It's changed directions. You can see the wake that it's creating and how that illuminates. Again, not bothered by me. You can see there's very little movement. I'm shooting with the zoom. I'm sitting on the landing. I'm not in the sand. I'm not in the water. I'm not being a thing to go take a selfie. This one I shot for one of the conservation groups. I thought it just spoke to, they reopened the beach, but this is a 3 or 4 month old seal. It doesn't need to be chased off a beach. It doesn't need to be doing any of these things. Like, they're still little tiny guys. Just because the pupping season is over doesn't mean that they're not small little guys like this. So I thought that was a strong image of this young harbor seal. By the way, you want to say mad respect to the people in Maui for handling business on the guy who threw the rock at the monk seal. I lived in Hawaii for a little bit. I'm the 4th generation in my family to have. The Hawaiians collectively really do protect their animals, and they protect their islands, and nothing but love and respect to that. So, whatever that guy has coming from him from the feds is probably not enough, but, cheers to Maui for doing their business. Went out on a boat, caught a humpback that really enjoyed being around the boat, kept coming up and taking a look around. I always get a kick when I can get the rostrum. It feels like as close as you're getting to their face, even though you don't really have any eyes or whatever. But it does feel, because of their unique coloring and their unique where the tubercles are, I do feel like you get a personalized shot with these. One of my favorites from that day, this is a kelping. You can see obviously the kelp from the raised pectoral fin coming down here along its body. There's also kelp wrapped around its other pectoral fin. They do this either to exfoliate or because they like texture, because there's not a lot of touch out in the open ocean for these, relatively solitary animals. I tried to Google, a good quote about kelping for an Instagram post, and they were saying, like, the article that I read was saying that it hadn't really been seen until in the 2000s, and it just blows me away that there's no way that they just started doing this, in my opinion. These are animals that have been developing and evolving for millions of years, but it's so hard to know so much about these guys who are out a little further and doing their thing. So, it's just, what else are we going to learn about these humpback whales and their behaviors, and the other whales too? Fin whales is an example. They don't even really know where they migrate. Another look at the pectoral wrapped in kelp. Its other pectoral fin is up here too. This wasn't the biggest humpback I've ever seen, but these pectoral fins can get up to 15 feet long. I mean, they're massive. So this is, probably easily more than 10 feet. It's really impressive to see. same whale. 2 or 3 times it was spy hopping, which is when they come up out of the water to look around. I never got a shot with its eye out of the water, but it was getting its eye relatively close to the surface, which would make me think that it could probably pretty easily see the boat and take a look at us. So there's just something to be said about, you know, this animal choosing to elevate itself and just vertical in the water column and take a look and be part of it all. These next 2 shots, they're not going to end up on my website, but they're interesting, and that's why I send them around. That's why I put them on my blog. To me, you know, here's the tip of the rostrum of an animal that's probably 35 to 40 feet, so it's probably 30,000 to 40,000 pounds, and it's just gone underneath that water. You just can't see it. You know, so to me, when I really like stare at these and I think about, you know, that mystery, like what's under there and how cool that is. The second shot of it, it's actually as it was slowly submerging, and you can see there's no splash, so it just sort of gracefully went back underneath the water, pulls down a little bit of a suction pool here. You can see the bubbles, which would suggest that it's under all of that water, still in focus. But again, huge animal that is just not, you know, you can't see it. It's just not there. So I don't know, it speaks to wonder to me, I guess. The older I get, the more I can admit about wonder, I suppose. Here's the humpback kelping along its rostrum. Same sort of thing. It just, any batch of kelp that it found on its way, it was straight beeline to it and to go play with it for a bit. And then again, another look at it kelping along its pectorals. I think this gives a good example of how long they are. One thing I'm not sure about, I'll have to talk to some naturalist friends of mine. There's these 3 marks along its joint. I don't know what the proper term would be, but at the base of the pectoral flipper here, I don't recall ever seeing this before, so I don't think it's just like, I don't think it's like folded skin or normal. I wonder if it's some sort of injury, whether it was anytime I see something repetitive, I always wonder prop chop, but I'm not sure. I'd have to chat with some people. There's a couple other photos that show it a little better, but I didn't send them around to people. So I think that does it for this week. So thank you very much for checking it out, and look forward to doing this again next week. If you're on my website, all of the camera settings are shared below the photos, so maybe you can learn a trick here or there and get one step further with your photography. Maybe there's another little bit of the story about, you know, whatever written up. I invite you to check it out. If you're on a web hosting or a video hosting site, I do link my website in the write-up. Jump over onto my site and check it out. Thanks again for the watch.